The Chosen Season 5, The Last Supper, Part 3, Episode 7. Let's jump into this one without further ado and let's talk about it. This is the beginning of the Last Supper area here. We don't really get much of it in Episode 8. We get kind of something else. So this is kind of the very beginning of the Last Supper before anything happens, before the institution of communion. We see that Jesus, at the very beginning of this episode, comes into the room, but he's next to a boy. He's not by himself. He comes into the upper room, and he looks over as he's welcomed by all the apostles. They all say Hag Pasach Sameach, and then he looks over at the boy and he says, "Thank you, Mark." Now, if you've been watching my channel for the last year, you know very well that we knew Mark was coming, right? A lot of people thought that the Watcher was Mark, who ended up being Matthias, but in actuality, we knew who Mark was for almost a year now. Actually, yeah, just about a year now. And this is actually a really interesting section here. We're going to show you a little bit of who Mark is, and he's played by Nick Alvarez here on Instagram. Now, I already knew that Nick was going to be playing Mark for a long time. And then just a few weeks ago, actually, Nick reached out to me and we had some conversation on Instagram. He's an awesome guy. He's a believer. And I'm really excited that he gets to play Mark. But this is Mark in the series. Now, Mark is the Mark you're thinking of. He's the author of the book of Mark, which is most likely written under the tutelage of Peter. Okay. And so Mark is going to be a very important person later on, of course. We're going to get there when we get there in the book of Acts or whatever else. But this most likely means that Nick is not only going to be playing Mark in The Chosen, but probably also in The Way of the Chosen later on. He'll be a very important character within that series as well. So we'll have to see how it all goes, right? We'll have to see what happens there going through this. And there's some really interesting moments with Mark overall. Now, Jesus then sends Mark downstairs after he's in the upper room with the disciples. He sends Mark downstairs to have the Seder supper with his parents. And so he goes and he does that. As he leaves, he kind of protests a little bit. He's like, "I wanted to serve you guys." And Jesus is like, "No, I've got it. I'll serve. You can go downstairs." So he leaves and he goes downstairs. Don't worry, we're going to see a lot more about Mark throughout this section here. But before they start dinner, Jesus ends up grabbing a pitcher of water and a bowl. And this is when Jesus is going to wash the disciples' feet. We actually see this in John chapter 13. So one of the examples here that we see it. And so we see that now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God, was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist, and then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So this is what it kind of goes on in the actual show here as we see it. He grabs the pitcher and a bowl and he tells them that he's going to wash their feet. And they're like, no, we're not doing that, and he's like, "Will you please do as I ask and not object for once?" And so he kind of reprimands them. And the first person to sit down and be ready is Big James. And so that's where he goes to first. He goes over and he begins to wash Big James' feet and then Thomas's feet, which is, really emotional moments as you kind of go through there. Then little James. And as he goes to little James, he actually reads through Isaiah 52. And he says, he kind of quotes this. He says, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns." And kind of talking through that with little James, I believe, as he's washing their feet. Then finally, he goes over to Judas and actually washes Judas's feet. One critique that I have at the beginning of this is that he doesn't wash everybody's feet. And I know that this is like such a, probably such a personal thing for me. In the scriptures, it does say that he washed all their feet. In the show, he doesn't. And I get why they don't, because for time, obviously they don't want to take all that time to wash everybody's feet like this. But he does wash Big James, Thomas, little James, and then Judas. And then he goes towards kind of the area where John is. and something interesting happens here. So while he's washing the other's feet, Peter actually gets up and he's like really uncomfortable with the situation, right? Because we know Peter. So he goes and he actually grabs his own basin and his own pitcher and his own towel, and he gets ready to wash Jesus's feet. And so Jesus, as he gets done washing Judas's feet, Peter says, "Okay, now it's your turn. Go ahead and sit down." And then Jesus is like, "What? Like, what are you talking about, bro?" And then we see this discourse here with Peter. So he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And in the show, he's like, "No, of course not. Like, you're not going to do that." Jesus answered him, "What I am doing, you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Basically, he's saying, "Hey, I'm teaching you a lesson here. Like, let me finish my lesson." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you will have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also wash my hands and my head. Like, wash all of me." And Jesus said to him, in the show, he goes, "Did you not take a bath this morning?" The one who has bathed does not need to wash, except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. That kind of comes earlier on in the previous episode. We see when he talks about how not every one of you is clean. And then we get to that section over there. But this is when he washed Peter's feet here. And of course, that's a really cool moment. I love this section here where he's washing their feet. The whole purpose of this is to show them that he is here to serve, that they're not to act like earthly kings. They're not to act like they're better than everybody else. They're to act in servanthood and humility, right? That is who they are as people as a whole. And he explains that he's setting an example. He's like, as I've done this, now you guys wash each other's feet, right? And he says under his breath while he's talking about Peter and everybody, Peter during that time, he says, "Sometimes Peter is still Simon." I love that there. That happens a couple of times, several times actually throughout the Last Supper and throughout the end here, which is quite interesting. Now he explains that he's setting the example here, but he's setting the example not only with their friends or with the people that they love, but also with enemies. And he says, even tonight. And of course, you kind of look over at Judas like, okay, we know what this guy's about to do. This is before Jesus has talked about there being a betrayal and all that kind of stuff yet. So Thomas ends this with, what is that supposed to mean? Which is what the next part starts with in the previous episode. I know it's confusing, but that's the way it is. Okay. Then we get a short intro here as we get into the rest of the episode, where we actually start with Mark, which is quite fun. So we start with Mark as he is setting up the upper room. The triclinium is all set up with a 3-table setup like we've seen during the Last Supper. And then also he's setting the placemats. So he's putting the tablecloths on and putting the placemats down and putting the plates and the utensils and whatever else onto the table, right? Making sure that it's perfect. Apparently he's had some sort of vision. Okay. He's had some sort of dream. His dad comes to the upper room and says, "Hey, like, what are you doing? Why are you setting all this up?" And he says, "Do you remember 3 years ago when I had this dream that we would buy this house, and you ended up buying this house because of my dream, because I felt it was from Adonai?" And his dad's like, "Yeah, of course. I remember we chose this house because it matched your dream." And then he says, "Well, I just had a new dream, and there are 3 specific things that happened. 1, I saw this room set up exactly like I see it right now. 2, I saw 2 men that were talking to you, and they said something specific, like saying, they said a specific phrase, basically. Then 3, I saw myself at the well, and I was carrying a jar." Isn't this strange? Like, isn't this weird? And so his dad is like skeptical, like super skeptical. He's like, "Okay, like you're not, thinking properly." But Mark is like, for sure. He's like, "I know this is from God. I know that this is like, this is what's going to happen." I thought this was a really unique and cool way to introduce Mark, and to introduce like why these certain things would be happening. Why would this room be prepared ahead of time if God didn't speak to someone to make it happen? Right. So it actually makes a lot of sense that Mark would be the one to kind of have this dream here and to make sure that everything is set up as it is, which we'll talk about why this kind of connects in a little bit here. But his dad is skeptical. He's like, "Nah, let's get out of here. Let's go to Solomon's porch," which is part of the temple. And then he's like, "Let's see if there's some more teaching today." I assume he means by Jesus. So they've been following Jesus around, listening to his teaching and things like that, or maybe from one of his apostles as well. But they don't really specify there. Anyway, as they get outside, they go down from the upper room onto the main street level, and they see that their home has actually been vandalized with, in Hebrew, it says, Jesus is Messiah. And of course, Mark is excited by this. He's like, look, but his dad is like, oh no, because he's worried that they'll be targeted because of this, right? It's not that he doesn't necessarily believe in Jesus, but he's really paranoid and worried about what's going to go on here. And Mark says, I believe it though. And his dad's like, I know, but no matter what we believe, we're going to get in trouble for this. We got to take it down quickly. I'll get some soap. You get some water. And Mark immediately clicks in his head. He's like, oh, I'm going to have to go to the well to get water. And that's where part of my dream was. And so he goes, his dad and him argue a little bit back and forth. And then his dad's like, go. And he's like, happy to, he's excited to go and get the water. And so we cut there, go to a new scene. We see that Big James is actually kind of just chilling by himself. He's at some sort of outdoor vendor where they're serving some drinks and food and stuff. He's kind of just chilling there. And he sees out of the corner of his eye as one of Kaphne's men comes up to the counter and kind of is eyeing up Big James quite a bit. Now, I think this man that has been watching Big James could be Rhema's older brother. We're never told who Rhema's brother is, but this is the youngest kind of guy that's been around Kaphne during this time. And I would assume that Rhema's brother would be on the side of Kaphne and kind of fighting, wanting that to happen there. And so I assume that this could be Rhema's brother at least, but we don't really ever get the conclusion to that overall. So he sees the man is following him or looking at him out of the corner of his eye. As he gets up to leave, the man begins to follow him as he's walking around every corner. And so Big James tries to lose him around different corners and eventually does so as he goes up to Peter, who is preaching at the moment. And he's actually doing a pretty good job preaching, where previously he was having some struggles. He actually says in a little bit, he's like, this is my 5th time preaching today. People are eating it up. And so he's getting better and better at preaching, which is really, really cool. But Big James is like, hey, we got to go. We got to get out of here, trying to give him the signal. Peter doesn't want to leave at first, but then he grabs him off the little stage that he's on. And they go and they run off, and he explains to him like, hey, Kaphne's men are following us. This can't be good. I actually saw them go and talk to Romans. They're working with the Romans. Like, that's crazy. We need to figure this out. Like, what's going on? And so they agree to go back to Phoebe's house. So they run back to Phoebe's house, and then they go and they see all the apostles are actually cleaning up. So there's a couple things that happen here. Number one, the apostles are kind of cleaning up and getting rid of any leaven in the house because they think that they're going to have Passover in Phoebe's house. And of course, Big James and Peter are like, we can't have Passover here. Like, this place is filled with idols. It's disgusting. What is happening here? And so they're like, okay, let's go ask Jesus, but don't tell him about the Kaphne stuff. Don't tell him about people following us. Like, let's just chill out. And John's like, you don't think he knows? Like, he's Jesus, bro. But they decide not to tell him anyway. And they go up to Jesus and they have a conversation with him. And so they begin to ask him like, hey, like, Phoebe's house probably isn't the best place to have a Passover dinner. Like, is there somewhere else we could do it? There's actually a small clip of this on Instagram that I'll show you here.
Is that what you came to ask?
No, Passover begins tonight.
Passover? Already?
Yes, that's why we're cleaning.
Every time.
Oh, sorry, I got me.
Come on.
They don't tell me these things.
Is that what?
So just a small part of the scene there. But we see as Big James gets trolled a little bit by Jesus, which of course is a common reoccurrence there. But they begin talking about how this place is not suitable for them to have Passover during this time, because obviously it's filled with idols and different things like that. So then Jesus has a conversation with them, and he's like, well, just do this, this, and this, and then you'll be good. And so we see that actually set up right here. Hey, real quick, I hope you're enjoying these videos. We put a lot of work into making these videos the best that we possibly can for you guys. If you want to help to support our channel and support what we do here on The Chosen Sleuth, then the best way to do that is through snipesupport.com. This is our Patreon where you can donate $5, $10, or $25 a month in order to help us to continue to make videos just like this, to have the time to spend hours and hours and hours and hours doing research and putting these videos together. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Thank you guys so much for your support. Where Mark chapter 14 says the Passover with the disciples, and on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready there prepared for us." And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. So this is exactly what happens. I love this this reaction that John has. Jesus is like, he says all of that, right? He says, "Here's what you're going to do, A, B, C, D." And then he's like, "Okay, did that answer your question?" And John is like, "Yeah. In fact, it was like really specific." Very, very not used to that, right? With Jesus, very obtuse language normally with Jesus, and so it was really funny to see that to see that reaction there. He goes, "Yes, it does in a surprisingly detailed way." So they told Thaddeus to go with them. So Big James actually stays back. Peter, John, and Thaddeus end up going towards the well to go and meet with this man that's supposed to be there. And so we see that happen. Big James stays behind and he says, "Hey, everybody, here's what's happening. We're being followed by people. You need to be really careful." Thaddeus is going to come back here. He's going to tell us where to go. And then whenever he tells us where to go, you're going to take the most obtuse routes, like just random routes to get there so that people can't follow you, basically. And so that's kind of where that scene ends. At the end of it, they realize, hey, where's Judas? Like, where's he at? We haven't seen him recently. And of course, he's been gone either for most of the day or all night long. And so they don't really know where Judas is at the moment. And then that is where we pick up with Judas. Great storytelling. Where's Judas? There he is. So we get to Judas, and this is a really interesting scene where we see him walking through Jerusalem kind of by himself. He's got his hood kind of up, and his sister, Devorah, comes to him and begins to like talk to him. She's super excited. She's like, "Judas, I've been looking for you everywhere. Like, finally I caught up with you. Like, I saw you at the triumphal entry, but we were like waving palm branches and celebrating with everybody." He's like, you were celebrating, blah, blah, blah. He was actually like quite confused and like, overwhelmed in the moment. And she's really excited. She's talking about how Jesus is the Messiah and how he was right and how she never should have doubted him. We see earlier in season 3, the beginning of season 3, we meet Devorah for the first time and the only time other than this, where she, basically tells Judas like, "Hey, you shouldn't follow this guy, right? Like, if you're going to do this, like, you really need to be sure that he's the one." And so now she's a totally different person, right? She's super excited that Jesus is here. She believes that he's the Messiah, and she knows that her brother is a big part of it, right? And so she's super excited. And there's a lot of quotes in here that she says that make it super uncomfortable because we know the truth, right? Judas has just come from Caiaphas's home, where he has just accepted the money to betray Jesus. And so we see it here. She says, "When will it happen?" Of course, she's talking about Jesus overthrowing Rome and becoming the king of Israel. And she says, it must be soon. It has to be. And he says, "Well, let me tell you something about soon." Right? He's trying to like kind of push her off a little bit. And then she goes, "I'm on to you." And he kind of like backs up a bit. Obviously, he doesn't want to be found out of what he's about to do. And she says, "I'm on to you. I can tell you're hiding something. I can tell when you're hiding something. You know when it will be, don't you?" And she's like super excited. And he kind of says, "Yeah, I know when it will be, but I can't say, and we're staying at this place, but I can't tell you where it is." And he's kind of keeping her excitement up, but at the same time, he's kind of pushing her off because he's ashamed of what he's done and what he's about to do. And she says, "I'm so excited. I don't know how I'll sleep." And then Judas says, "Yeah, I don't know either. Like, I don't know how I'll sleep either." And then she says, which of course is the line that Jesus tells him during the Last Supper, or very close to it. She says, "Go, like, I'm taking up your time. I don't mean to take your time. Go and do what you have to do." And Judas replies, "I will, I must." And so it's a really like double meaning sort of conversation where Judas is having this conversation with himself of like, okay, there's some stuff that's going to be happening here. And she knows nothing about it. And she's just super excited that Jesus is here as the Messiah. And she's like ready to go. It's just it's a heartbreaking conversation, to be honest, because her reaction in just a few hours is going to be the complete opposite, right? She's going to find out within the next day or so that her brother is dead. And not only that, but he's the one that betrayed Jesus. So yeah, it's a hard conversation that's going to be happening there. Next up, we see that John, Peter, and Thaddeus begin to go to the well. They find out where the closest well is. They go over there. They see Mark as he's filling up this jar of water, and Mark begins to walk back to his house, and they follow him. Now, when they get back to the house, they actually see the writing on the wall of Jesus as Messiah, and they're like, "Oh, this has to be the place." And then Mark starts like scrubbing it off the house because his dad is making him get it off the house. And they're like, "Oh, maybe not." But Peter is like, "This has to be the place. Jesus told us this exact instructions. You know, this is the guy. We're going to go talk to him." And then he sends Thaddeus back to Phoebe's house and is like, "Hey, this is the place. Tell the guys to come here, when they're ready to come." And so they go up to John and Peter, go up to Mark and his dad, and they begin having a conversation. And of course, they kind of relay this information here. They say what is said in Mark chapter 14. "The teacher says, 'Where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready there, prepare for us. So they kind of say partially this, but they also add a little bit to it to make it a little bit more, readable within a TV show at least. And so they see that there. You can see that Mark's dad is very like hesitant, right? He's very much like, "Okay, is my family going to get killed for this? Like, are we going to get in trouble for this? Are the religious leaders going to hate us? Are the Romans going to hate us? Like, who is like, what do I do here?" But he's still willing. He still says yes, but he's very paranoid the whole time. And so Mark tells his dad, he's like, "These are the men from my dream. Like these are the guys, So he says yes, and they kind of go to the upper room and start getting things ready. Now the rest of this episode, basically the entire rest of this episode, is really interesting because we get into this realm of flashbacks that kind of takes up the entire rest of the episode. A lot of people that I've heard on the comment section so far have been like, "I really did not like this part." Now, I'm going to try to hopefully give you a little bit more of a deep dive into why this part is actually kind of good. I do think that there are parts of it that are just kind of like, why are we watching this right now? Like, shouldn't we be watching like the most important section of Jesus's, life here in Holy Week and what's going on here and preparing for the crucifixion and all this stuff? And I think it just felt like, I think this is the major kind of comment that I'm getting, is it felt like it was a filler episode. Like, it felt like they just had too much time and they were like wanting to fill in this section, and they didn't want to go further in the chronological time frame than what they wanted to do, at the end of the season. So I don't know, but I've definitely heard a lot of comments of being like, yeah, I had a lot of struggles with the flashbacks. Like, I didn't really understand them. So let's talk about this here. Starts here. So John and Peter are in the upper room. This is not a flashback. This is present time. And they kind of reminisce about where they came from, right? They're talking about how they used to be fishermen and how Jesus found them and everything that they've been through over the last 3 years. And they kind of have this like sort of how did we get there? Like, how did we get here? Right? Where did we come from? Sort of moment. And then Mark, while they're kind of talking about these things, is running around. He's worried if everything is okay, if it's good enough for Jesus. And he's kind of making sure everything is in its place. I think Nick did a really great job playing Mark. He gives that kind of youthful energy that is needed for someone like Mark. And I think he's going to have some really cool moments in the rest of The Chosen, and as well in the Acts series, hopefully later on. But we just see him kind of running around as he's grabbing different things and like being like, oh, I forgot this, I need this, sort of moments there. John and Peter kind of have a conversation, and they're like, they come to the conclusion that this is clearly led by God, right? Like, Mark is here, his dad is here. They said yes to using this room. God clearly prepared this room ahead of time for them. And God is like leading them in this way. But at the same time, why aren't they smiling? Like, why aren't they happy about this? You know, what is going on here that is making them like, something's a bit off, right? And Peter and John, they're kind of like, why are we doing this? Like, we don't understand what is going on. Like, why are we having Passover here? Why is this being set up for us? Why is God making all of these things work out in this way? I don't understand. But John kind of comes to the conclusion at the end. He goes, you know, I don't know everything. I don't understand everything. But what I do know is that Jesus is very, very sad. Right? Like, he's obviously going through something very intense. And John says, I've been paying attention. Like, I'm beginning to understand a bit more, but I still don't understand everything. And so that's where we end there. Now, next we jump into this flashback section of what is going on with the rest of the apostles here. Okay. First one we see is Simon the Zealot. So we get a flashback of him as, first off, it starts in present day. All of these flashbacks have the same sort of cadence. Okay. Starts in present day. They're leaving Phoebe's house and they go towards Mark's house. And on the way to Mark's house, they're all taking different paths, doing different things. This in and of itself is a metaphor, right? Going from Phoebe's house to Mark's house, but they've all taken different paths to get there, is a metaphor for their lives. Okay. So the metaphor is, we've all taken different paths. We've all experienced different things, but the ending place is still the same. And that is as followers of Jesus. Okay. So that's the metaphor of them taking different paths throughout the city and then kind of going throughout these different things. Okay. Then within these flashbacks, there's even more metaphors that are kind of baked into them. Okay. So this first one, we see Simon the Zealot as he's walking through the butchering section of town, which I've been to Israel, and there is really whole alleyways filled with butchers. And it's like one of the most disgusting things ever because it just smells horrible. But Simon the Zealot is here as they're butchering, probably lambs for Passover, as well as some other things. And he sees out the back door is a small stream of blood that is coming out from underneath the door and kind of going into the alleyway. This is when his flashback starts. It's back in time, so he's obviously part of the Zealots again, and he has his Sicarii dagger, as well as two of his brothers with him that are a little bit younger than him. And so they're all pushing on a door as that door is about to be kicked in by some sort of enemy, most likely Romans, okay? And they're pushing on the door, they're trying to push it through to get to these Zealots, and they're holding it, and it's not being broken down quite yet, but it's almost there. Simon then says to the other two brothers, he says, go and run out the back door. I'll hold them off here as you guys can get away. And so he decides that he's going to sacrifice himself for these other two brothers. Then within this, they end up running away after a little bit of pushback. They're like, no, we don't want to leave. But then he's like, no, the order needs brothers like you. You need to go. And I'll hold them off for here, give you some time to get away. Okay. Then he kind of stands there with his Sicarii dagger and he's like pumping himself up, like ready, like about to die, right? Like he's about to sacrifice himself. He's going to jump into it. And then this is where the door stops actually being pushed in. And then the whole thing goes silent. Okay. After a few, like maybe 30 seconds or so of him standing there, like ready to attack, he realizes like everything is silent, and then he goes out to the back door and looks, and he sees that the two brothers that he told to run away are now dead in the alleyway, and there's no enemies around anymore. And so they had set up some sort of trap, or they had found them as they're coming out of the back or whatever. And so Simon is then like crying over them, and he's sad, right? And he he looks at them as the blood is kind of draining from them. We see pools of blood beginning to form around them. The message for this, at least in my opinion, and I'm going to kind of label messages for each of these because I see that this is kind of what they've gone through and what they're thinking about. For Simon specifically, I think he's thinking, I should have died, but God brought me here for this, right? I should have died being a zealot. I should have given my life for this order, but instead, God saved me for this moment. He saved me for this exact time, and that's why I'm here, right? That's kind of the message of his flashback here. Next up, we go to Nathaniel. Nathaniel's is an interesting one. We actually go back to some sort of architecture school. Okay. He's a student as he's sitting at a desk with a bunch of other students. It's almost like a Beit Midrash, but for architecture. At least that's what it seems like. And so he is kind of working on some of his designs and getting things ready. Later on, we find out that he's getting ready for a test. Okay. But he gets really, really frustrated. He actually takes everything off his desk and throws it to the side, and it falls to the floor. Then he gets up and he goes to the window and he hears a harpist playing. This is how I forgot the first part of this in present day is that Nathaniel actually sees a vendor who's selling a harp. And so this brings him back to this exact memory here. He sees a harpist playing outside in this flashback, and he begins to hear her sing, and she's singing this song right here. From Psalm 130. So she sings, O Lord, the depths I cry to you. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. She kind of sings like a variation of some different words in here, basically, but it comes from Psalm 130. And so we see as Nathaniel's looking out towards the window and he sees her singing that. And then he actually gets quite emotional. Like he starts to cry listening to her. And I think there's a reason for this. We'll talk about it in a second. Then his teacher comes up to him and he kind of composes himself, and the teacher goes, I thought you were getting ready for your test. And Nathaniel says, yes, I was, but I'm just taking a break. Then he gives him a letter that is from Philip, and Philip talks about his, adventures with John the Baptist and what they're doing and how he wishes Nathaniel would be there, but not yet. He wants Nathaniel to keep on getting better at his craft so that whenever John makes the way for the Lord and the road is ready, that Nathaniel can help to build it, essentially. And so he's like, I can't wait till that time when we can work together and build this together, which of course is a beautiful thing. What I think the message is here is one that God prepared him for this, right? Nathaniel had to go through a bunch of schooling. God prepared him to be the person that he is, right, in the right moment. Also, clearly, Nathaniel was afraid of failure, right? He was afraid of that test in the beginning, right? We see as he's looking at this test and he's kind of freaking out quite a bit, and he's worried about what is going to happen. Why is he getting upset? Because he feels like he's not getting it quite right. Okay, so he's afraid of that failure of the test, which obviously goes towards the failure of who he is as a person, which we see later on in season 2. He does fail, and now he no longer has any type of identity, right? Him being an architect was the identity that he had. And so as we see that kind of break apart, we see that Nathaniel in present day, he no longer fears failure. He knows that God has made him worthy. God has made him good enough. God has made him successful, right? He doesn't have to worry about anything else there. So that's really cool. Next up, we get Andrew and Philip. Of course, this is going to be a flashback to John the Baptist. We get another moment with our John the Baptist coming back to life a little bit. Just a flashback, though. We get a flashback to Andrew and Philip, but the first portion of this gets kind of triggered by they're walking through Jerusalem and they see an aristocrat or a leader of some sort being carried through on one of those, carryable kind of chariots by a bunch of servants. And you hear as there's a Roman guard up front who's like kind of making the way through the crowd. And he says, make straight the way, move, get out of the way, make straight the way. And of course, this harkens back to John the Baptist having that same sort of understanding. Now we get a couple of different moments here from Luke chapter 3, where we see that John the Baptist is preparing the way. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea, and okay, that's too much. And Trachonitis, and okay, we're going to go down here. he went into all the region around Jordan, proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins, as it is written in the book of the words of Isaiah the prophet, the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. Every valley shall be filled, every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall become straight, and the rough places shall become level ways. And all flesh shall see the salvation of God. Okay, so that is who John the Baptist is. That's kind of the time period in which we're jumping into here. We see that Andrew and Philip and Avner and a bunch of other the followers of John are actually walking along a road as Rome is clearing the road. They're ripping up trees. They're making sure people's houses are moved so that this road is straight for Tiberius and for other aristocrats and different people like that to come through on this road. And so here we see that John obviously kind of resembles this as well, right? You're using it as a metaphor here. And he begins to talk back and forth between this Roman guard. The Roman obviously knows who he is and calls him crazy and all this different type of stuff. But they begin talking about how John's purpose is to make straight the way. And John asks him, like, what right do you have to move these sacred trees and to do all these things? And the Roman is just basically like, leave us alone. Like, let us do what we need to do. Like, this is our job, blah, blah, blah. But John is the one making the way. That's what Philip says, for one mightier than him. And so we see a lot of these different, sections here as we talk about it. We also grab this section here near the end of this little flashback. We see soldiers asked him, and we, what shall we do? And he said to them, do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusation, and be content with your wages. And the Roman kind of like makes fun of him for saying that, basically. But they continue on. They don't worry about the Roman anymore. And John, as bold as he is, he kind of like lets it go and they continue moving forward. Here, Andrew begins to kind of complain a little bit. He's like, how long do you guys travel for? Because I've got to be back in Capernaum in 3 days because I got to go fish. I got to go do some stuff. And he talks about his taxes that he owes. So this is probably somewhere in between episode 2 and 4, somewhere in there. With the timeline of The Chosen, season 1, 2, and 4. So this is like right at the beginning of Andrew. We've probably met him already, but we haven't gotten to the point where the miracle of the fish has happened, right? And so in the timeline of The Chosen, Jesus doesn't go into the 40 days, 40 nights of the wilderness. He just kind of gets baptized by John and then immediately goes to Capernaum and does the miracle of the fish and all that kind of stuff. So the timeline is a little bit weird there, but we kind of see that happening in there. Anyway, we see as Andrew is complaining, he's like, man, this is taking a long time. We're traveling a long distance. I'm really hungry, right? And so they like begin to talk about what they do normally and all that kind of stuff. And Philip reassures him like, it'll all be okay. And he's like, do you guys have any food? They're like, yeah, we got plenty of food. Why didn't you say something, And so they pull out a little bag and Philip gives him some locusts that are, cooked and dried. And then they are sauteed in honey and some natural honey, which is very funny. Of course, we know that John the Baptist ate locusts and honey. So that's where that kind of comes from. And he says, why didn't you say you were hungry? We have plenty of food. Not just any food, delicacies. And then he says candied locusts. And that is what they come up with. Now, the message for me on this flashback is we have done our job, right? The way is made. And now we are here in Jesus's presence, right? We get to see what happens here at the end of the way being made. Jesus has done his ministry. And now we get to see what happens next, right? And so Philip and Andrew were part of that way being made. And that's a big completion by John the Baptist there, of course. Now, next we get Thomas. Thomas is an interesting one. As he's going around the streets of Jerusalem, we see that he actually sees a woman as she accidentally runs into a vendor's cart and breaks an oil lamp. A couple of them, actually. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, let me help you pick that up. I'm so sorry. And the vendor begins picking up all the broken oil lamps. We see as Thomas goes into his "That's So Raven" flashback moment. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. But Thomas begins to go back and does his flashback, and it actually goes to him when he's really young. We don't know how young he's supposed to be. Now, I don't think he looks as young as he's supposed to be. From what we know, he came to Cophny as a young boy. Whenever he was going to go work in the vineyard, and that's when he lost his dad. So we know that he's supposed to be very young here. He's supposed to be an orphan. First of all, he's supposed to be very young. It just looks like Thomas without a beard, to be honest. He looks a little bit younger, but not like a ton younger. So it's a little bit like jarring. And so he doesn't have a beard. He's supposed to be a younger kid, probably in his teenage years or something. But we see as his dad actually sits down with him and begins to speak with him. He's like, "Hey, something bad happened. Me and my brothers, your uncles, we're going to go to this guy's house in order to get the money that he owed us. And something bad happened. You know, my brothers got hurt, but I saved them and I prevented them from being hurt even further," right? Basically, what it's insinuating without saying it out loud is that his dad killed someone, okay? Or at least hurt them very badly to the point where he was going to be arrested. And so his dad most likely killed someone there, most likely killed one of these other guys that they were trying to get money from. And then the Romans come in and they grab his dad. And on the way out, his dad kicks like a bench that has an oil lamp on it, and the oil lamp shatters on the ground. So this is where we see that Thomas's family basically is uprooted, and we see this is how Thomas lost his dad, which we actually heard first about in season 2, episode 3 is the first time we heard about that. Now, earlier on in this season, Cophny actually says that he was an orphan, which would potentially mean that his mom died or something as well, but we don't have full understanding on that or what happened there. Or maybe it just means that his dad is gone, and because his dad is gone, he becomes an orphan because his mother doesn't have, because she's a woman, something weird legally happens there. I don't know. So, I'm not 100% sure what that's alluding to there, but that's a really short flashback there. We get that moment there where his dad is taken away. He's obviously aghast. He's very, scared at that moment. This one I actually related to quite a lot. My dad died when I was very young. And so the message here, to me at least, is that Thomas's path was going to lead him to somewhere similar to his father, right? Was going to lead him somewhere that was totally against the direction, the opposite direction of where Jesus is. But even in spite of that, Jesus still made his path good. Right. I definitely resonate with this a lot. In my life, it's the same thing, right? My dad was a heavy drug addict, did a lot of crazy stuff growing up. And I only knew him for a few years of my life. And he died when I was very young. So he died because of drug use and sharing needles and a bunch of different stuff like that. And so for me, like, I started off life with a bad hand. Right? I started off life with that sort of influence around me all the time. So because of that, I often would be like, I would often be like, I knew that I would have a tendency to fall towards those things. Does that make sense? So Thomas is in the same light. Thomas is in the same area where his dad obviously did something horrible, and he would have the tendency to follow in his dad's footsteps. And so that's a possibility there. But yeah, that's that flashback there. Then we go back to Thomas. Then we go to Matthew. Now, Matthew, as he's walking around Jerusalem, he sees a tax collector, which of course connects to Matthew. And the tax collector gets spit on. And this is a really interesting flashback. These flashbacks, as we go further, kind of get longer and longer from this point. We get one with Matthew where he has a moment where someone spits on him on his first day being a tax collector. This is the only little bit of Gaius that we get in this season at all. We don't get Gaius really anywhere else because he's in Capernaum. We're not there anymore, right? We're not really going to see Gaius, I don't think, at all in the rest of the season or the rest of the series until season 7, probably. So, but we get a little bit of Gaius here on the first day of Matthew being a tax collector in Capernaum. And so the person that spits on him And he's like, Gaius, you're not going to do anything? And he's like, no, I'm not going to do anything unless they, hurt you or if there's a disruption of business or whatever. He's like, this is a disruption. I'm going to have to go home and change my clothes. And he's like, suck it up, basically. Like, you can't do that. You're going to have to, you're going to have to buy some better clothes later on. You can afford that now because you're a rich tax collector, right? Then they talk about it being Matthew's first day. They talk about Gaius's previous tax collector tenants that he had there and how they've been hurt in the past. In fact, just one of them, the last time before Matthew, one of them got beat up on their first day and basically quit. And so Matthew was like scared that that's going to happen to him. And so Gaius stops the next person that's going to come up to the tax collector booth, and he begins talking with Matthew, and he's like, hey, I got you a driver basically to make sure that you can get here safely so that I can do my job, because if you don't do your job, Quintus is going to punish me and he's going to make me do, that math and stuff. And I hate that stuff. And so they have a little bit of back and forth there. Remember, this is before Gaius liked Matthew at all. This is before they have any sort of relationship. And so he was being mean to him, like we see him back in season 1. Right. Yeah, that's kind of all that happens in that flashback. Nothing too deep. There's more dialogue there, but it's not crazy important. The message that I got from this one, being Matthew, is like, I was an enemy of God, but now I'm his friend. I did not understand anything, right? He didn't understand anything of God before, but now I trust in his understanding. So that's kind of where Matthew is with this. That's the reason for Matthew being here and doing what he's doing there. Now, the last one here is Little James. Little James is quite interesting because we have never seen kind of the beginning of Little James. Remember, he came in season 1, episode 2 during the Shabbat episode, and then he kind of was just there. Same thing with Thaddeus, which we're going to talk about in a second. But Little James, of course, we never really get that background. So as he's walking around Jerusalem, getting ready to go to Mark's house, to the upper room, he sees the 288 choir singing in the temple. He's in the court of women here. And as he sees them, he begins to flash back to the time when he was trying out or he was learning how to sing himself. And so he's in his choir back at home where he started, and he's singing with a group of guys, just like they're singing in the temple there. And then the group ends, and the teacher's like, great job, you're all amazing, so glad that we could do this, and I'm so happy for where you guys are going to go in your future, right? And then so we see as that kind of ends, and the teacher begins to sign off on paperwork for everybody to be sent to the locations where they're going to be a cantor or to be a singer. Okay. And so we see as the first one goes to Gilead, I think. And then the next one goes to Chorazim, and then Little James is up, and he's like, okay, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to Magdala? Do you want to go to Bethsaida? Do you want to go to Capernaum? Like, what are these places that you want to go? He's kind of giving him some options. And he's like, oh, I want to go to Jerusalem to sing in the 288. And he's like, no, like you can't do that. He's kind of laughing at him. He's like, you can't be serious. And James is like, yeah, I'm going to go to Jerusalem to be part of the 288 choir. And the teacher is just like, no, there's no way that this could be the case. There's no way that you could do this. And he actually pulls out some scripture and he says, read this right here. And he takes him to Leviticus. And in Leviticus, it basically says like you cannot, there shouldn't be anyone with like dwarfism or that has a longer leg than the other or has a disfigured foot or is lame or anything like that. And so obviously that would mean Big James is part of that, but he's like, no, this is talking about being a priest. It doesn't matter about being a singer in the temple. And the guy's like, well, actually all the Pharisees over there have taken it one step further, and anybody that is openly seen working for the temple, they have to abide by these things as well to make sure that people aren't, deformed or have any other thing kind of going on. And so Little James is like, oh, well, I'm going to go anyway, I'm going to go and I'm going to make them take me. Like, I'm just going to show them how great of a singer I am and they can't turn me away. And the guy's like, I know, like, don't make that trip. You're just going to go all that way just to be turned away. And then Little James walks out the door and he begins his journey. And so he runs off and he begins to go towards Jerusalem. And on the way, he stops to make a camp for the night, basically. And he can't he can't light the fire correctly. He's trying to get it lit. It won't light for him. And so he's frustrated, and he ends up just kind of turning over and putting his cloak over him and trying to sleep that night. And as he does go to sleep, eventually, then someone wakes him up with a tap on the shoulder, and it is Thaddeus. And he's terrified at first. He thinks someone's going to try to rob him. He's like, I don't have any money. I don't have anything. And Thaddeus is like, we're not going to hurt you. We're not here to rob you. Like, chill out. Just wanted to make sure that you're okay. Wanted to make sure that you weren't a dead body on the side of the road. And so he kind of wakes up and looks over, and he says, Thaddeus says, like, me and my rabbi were traveling through town. Do you need any help, basically? And so they end up sitting next to him, start the fire with him, and they kind of sit down and talk with him for a little while. And Jesus introduces himself. Jesus definitely looks a lot different. I think they were trying to hide Jonathan's hair so they didn't have to cut it. So they put his head in like a turban almost, which is interesting. You don't really see Jesus in that way ever. And so it's interesting to see that. So they help him make a fire. They kind of get him comfortable. And then Jesus says, I'd love to hear your story. And then little James goes, are you guys angels? And Thaddeus kind of looks over at Jesus and he's like, well, I mean... And Jesus is like, no, we're not angels. We're just craftsmen. And then they begin talking there as he starts to kind of tell his story. Now, the message here for this one clearly is like, even when I was not good enough, God made me good enough, right? Even when I was not chosen, God chose me. That's kind of the message here. So it makes a lot of sense there. Then the last scene that we get here is not a flashback. We just get them in the Last Supper room, the upper room there, as all of them except for Thaddeus are all waiting. Everybody but Jesus and Thaddeus are in the room now, and they are waiting for everybody to show up. And they're getting a little bit paranoid. They're like, where's Thaddeus? Why isn't he here yet? And they look out the window. They see some Roman soldiers walk by, and they're like, oh my gosh, like what is happening here? He's going to get kidnapped. He's going to get arrested. Where is Thaddeus? And then the episode ends with Peter saying, never underestimate that kid. Now, this is interesting because I really thought they showed us that line in the behind the scenes. Like they were filming part of the behind the scenes, and they had that line of Peter saying, never underestimate that kid. And I really thought that it was Peter talking about Mark, because it would make a lot of sense that Peter would be connected to Mark in some way. We don't really get that at all in this season, where there's a moment where Peter is like kind of like connecting to Mark, which I would have thought we would have gotten a little bit of that. But we really didn't at all. But he actually is saying that about Thaddeus. He's saying never underestimate that kid. And then we'll see later what happens with Thaddeus in the next episode. So that is what happens there. That is the end of episode 7. Only one more episode to go in the season finale. And there's a lot to talk about there for sure. So we'll get into that one in just a little bit. Let me know your comments about episode 7 in the comments down below. And of course, we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.